India ignores Trump. New Delhi refuses to stop buying Russian oil. India has not given its refineries any instructions to stop buying Russian oil, sources familiar with the situation said. This comes days after Trump harshly criticized New Delhi for its energy ties with Moscow. Sources say no decision has been made to stop imports from Russia. State-owned and private refiners decide their own sourcing, which remains a commercial choice. On Wednesday, Donald Trump accused India of continuing to buy most of its military equipment, including T-90 tanks, S-400 missile systems, Su-30 MKI fighters, and energy from Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Indian imports and threatened more sanctions over New Delhi's ties with Moscow. 2 days later, he told reporters India might suspend Russian oil purchases, calling it a positive step. India emphasized that its energy policy is determined by market factors and prices. According to Bloomberg sources, last week the government instructed oil refineries to prepare plans in case Russian oil imports are cut off. State-owned companies were asked to draft a plan for alternative suppliers in case of a cutoff from Russia. One source stressed this is scenario planning, not a direct order. According to the New York Times, India will continue to buy Russian oil despite the threat of U.S. sanctions. The newspaper cited 2 senior Indian government officials who wished to remain anonymous. A spokesperson for India's Ministry of Petroleum did not respond to Bloomberg's request for comment outside of business hours. The EU and US have criticized Indian refiners for aiding Moscow during the war in Ukraine. India, now the largest buyer of Russian marine oil, boosted purchases from near zero to about a third of its total imports. A reduction or cessation of Russian oil imports would force India to rely on supplies from the Persian Gulf, where prices are much higher. The government is in no hurry to increase import spending, one of the sources said. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi maintains a close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who hosted him in October. Vladimir Putin is expected to visit India later this year. Last week, Indian Oil Corporation bought at least 5 million barrels of U.S. oil and 2 million from Abu Dhabi for relatively quick delivery. India does not plan to give up Russian oil despite Donald Trump's pressure and tariffs. For New Delhi, it's about cost, not politics. Moscow offers big discounts, while alternatives raise fuel prices. Despite U.S. pressure, India follows its own economic interests. Let's talk about the economic component, particularly the Europeans, because Western publications report that European banks have been at their peak since 2008. But how long will this economic miracle and celebration last? Shares of Europe's largest banks have soared to their highest levels since the global financial crisis of 2008, amid rising long-term interest rates and confidence in the stability of the European economy. One of the most striking examples was the rise in the value of shares of HSBC, one of the leading banks in the UK. Other major banks in Spain, Italy, and Germany also showed significant growth. Their stock prices have reached their highest levels in more than a decade. A few years ago, the European banking sector was considered a weak link. After the 2008 crisis, banks struggled to recover, lagging behind U.S. competitors. But in 2025, the situation changed. The main reason for this is the increase in interest rates on loans and bonds, which allowed banks to earn more profit on the difference between loan income and payments to depositors.
Це дозволило банкам отримувати більше прибутку на різниці між тим, скільки вони заробляють на кредитах, і тим, скільки платять вкладникам.
This difference is called net interest income, and it is the main source of bank profitability today. For example, in Germany, the yield on 30-year government bonds is one full 3 percentage points higher than the yield on 2-year bonds, and in the UK, the difference is even greater.
У Великій Британії ця різниця ще більша.
Banks have benefited from economic activity in the region, with demand for loans growing and business recovering, which is directly reflected in improved financial performance. As a result of internal reforms, banks have cut costs, optimized their structure, and relied on digital services. An additional source of profit was the increase in fluctuations in the financial markets due to the sharp actions of the U.S. administration. Banks with large securities trading units were able to make good money on these changes. However, this growth is not unconditional. It is already clear that some banks have faced challenges. For example, HSBC lost some of its value after the publication of its second quarter financial report. Earnings were below analysts' expectations, and on Friday, a wave of declines swept across the sector after U.S. President Donald Trump announced new trade tariffs, showing how much the banking market depends on external events. There are other restrictions, and in many countries the authorities are against mergers, which hinders the growth of the sector. For example, in Spain the merger of two large banks failed, and in Italy the government did not support the attempt to merge local financial institutions. Experts say that the banking sector has not seen the large-scale consolidation that the market considers necessary, and the result is that European banks have been given a second chance. Thanks to rising rates and economic stability, they have finally started to make good money, but the future remains uncertain. If interest rates stop rising or a new wave of geopolitical tension begins, this growth could quickly come to naught. There is success, but it does not guarantee stability, and this is an important issue that we will be discussing more than once. Can we call this result a certain economic success for Europe and a stable foundation that this success will now be permanent? Probably not, because this news is more of a phenomenon, an element of a global process, because it is hard to imagine that global interest, demand, and stability have flowed from the American sector to the European one.
Перетекли саме з американського сектору, з Америки в європейський.
The reason is Donald Trump and his drastic actions. If Trump becomes stable, completes his affairs, and comes to a stable financial sector or restrictions, he will say that there will be no more new changes. So those who fled America quickly will flee Europe quickly.
Тож всі ці люди, які швидко тікали з Америки, будуть швидко тікати з Європи.
The first reason is Trump. The second reason is that the European continent is not safe as long as there is a Russia that is raging in the active phase. Even though Europeans benefit from the fact that the war is not being transferred to NATO and the European sector but is taking place only in Ukraine at the expense of Ukrainians, they are still afraid. This fear affects the economy, because how can there be a strong economy when there is Russia threatening to attack NATO, where there are army generals, including American ones, who say that if the Russians go to Kaliningrad, the attack will be quickly repelled.
Де є генерали армій, в тому числі американських, які кажуть, що якщо на Калінінград росіяни підуть, ми швидко будемо відбивати атаку.
This is great, but it means war and provocations. The economy cannot be really stable in a region with serious military conflicts or potential military provocations.
Реально стабільною в реальності, де є серйозні військові конфлікти або потенційні військові провокації.
We see this as a phenomenon and believe that big money will leave Europe sooner or later. For now, it is a safe haven that everyone was counting on, and it has paid off. We see interesting news. Europe is growing, which is very good.
виправдали. Ми бачимо такі цікаві новини. Європа зростає, це дуже добре.
Ukraine needs to take advantage of this, ask for more help, and say that while the economy is growing there, we have a war here that, if not stopped, will destroy this growth. There are many other arguments. I am confident that our diplomatic corps can consult with the economic corps, make the right arguments, and use them.
Може проконсультуватись з економічним, привести правильні аргументи і цим скористатись.